Things are getting hot in Russia's neighborhood, with the latest uprising in Kyrgyzstan adding fuel to the fire that began weeks ago in western neighbor Belarus, where thousands have been demanding removal of authoritarian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan are smoldering once again over the separatist enclave Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia's been delivering weapons, but otherwise showing uncharacteristic restraint. Putin's top priority long seemed to be restoring Russia's place as a global player. Has he lost his touch? Our title, Russia's Explosive Frontiers. What is Putin's goal? Hello and welcome to the Point. It is a pleasure to introduce our guests, beginning with Vladimir Esipov. He is a colleague here on DW's Russian desk, and he says Putin wants to keep the power and make Russia great again. And I'm very glad to have with us Alexander Rahr. He's a political scientist and analyst specializing on Russia, and his view, as a whole, this is change like the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. How explosive it will be remains to be seen. And a pleasure to have with us Sabine Adler. She is a correspondent at German broadcaster Deutschlandradio, and she says, sowing divisions, supporting dictators, subverting borders, Russia remains on the wrong side of history. So, Sabine Adler, it seems like supporting dictators and subverting borders used to come a bit easier to Vladimir Putin. After protests over the rigged election in Belarus began, he waited weeks to affirm his support for Lukashenko. Last time Armenia and Azerbaijan clashed, it took Russia just 4 days to quell the conflict. Now it seems to be reluctant to stop the fighting. What's going on?
I would say when it comes to Belarus, this is at the end, no question for Putin who he wants to support. Of course, it's Lukashenko, and he wouldn't allow that a mass protest can change a regime. That's what he fears all the time, and there is no way not supporting Lukashenko. Of course, it's possible that he creates a figure like a so-called opposition leader and install him in Belarus with the help of propaganda, with so-called TV journalists and so on, and fake news and information war. That's all possible. But at the first step, I wouldn't say that he really thought about not confirming and not supporting Lukashenko. No idea.
And Vladimir, you say Russia wants to hold on to, Putin wants to hold on to power. Is his power actually at risk? Certainly his approval ratings appear to be declining.
I don't see any risks for Putin's power, and to keep the power is the most normal thing for any political in the world. So the political systems are different, but the wish to keep on power is the same, whatever country you take. So I don't think, back to your question, I don't think any risk for Putin's power. The approval ratings can go up and down, but there's no real danger for him.
Last time his poll ratings were declining in 2012, he quickly revived his standings with moves like the annexation of the Crimea. Are we seeing a different strategy now? No,
the ratings 2011, 2012, we had a huge mass protest on the street of Moscow, which were de-escalated very professionally by Russian authorities. And Crimea was 2014, 2 years later. So I don't think any connection with the ratings 2011 and what happens to Crimea 3 years later. Sorry, what was the question?
Simply the question of whether we're seeing a different strategy now when we see how Russia is dealing with the conflicts in the neighborhood.
No, the strategy on the same. The focus of the Russian government is much more geopolitical. So that's what angers the Russian publics for some reason, for some parts, because the clear shift from domestic issues for economy, for medical problems, which we have in context of Corona crisis, the Russian government is very much busy with geopolitics, with Syria, Libya, Belarus, with many issues on the global level, and not paying much attention to the domestic issue. And it's what angers the Russian public and Russians inside the country. Because I don't think the other Russian president would be less interested in geopolitics, but probably more interested in domestic issues.
Alexander Rahr, you know Russia well. From what I've read, you have dined with President Putin, and you've also consulted for major Russian firms like Gazprom. So you say in your opening statement that the current situation could bring about change like the fall of the Berlin Wall. What do you mean exactly? Where is this change going?
I mean that the world is facing radical, dramatic changes. And I compare the changes we will witness with the changes which we have saw 30 years ago. I think that, of course, there is no Berlin Wall to collapse. But the world is moving from one world order, from the, I would say, unipolar world order, which was designed as a liberal world order by the West, by the United States and the European Union, after the end of communism. We're moving now to a new stage in world history where the world will be defined by major powers, not only by the West, but by a very strong China, by a new Russia with new strengths, but also a more military-minded Russia, and also a strong Islamic movement and force, which we'll witness also from the south.
And do you see any change in Putin's way of dealing with the tensions in the neighborhood compared to how he might have handled it earlier?
You know, I just came back from this Valdai Club in Moscow last week, and I asked him the question, said, would he deliver again the speech which he gave to the German Bundestag exactly 20 years ago, where he said the Cold War is over? Would you do the same speech again, I asked him. And he said, yes, but in a softer way. And what he confirmed is, for him, is that the NATO expansion was the mother of all the problems which he faces with the West. This is the Russian view, of course, but this is a geopolitical fight which the Russians have today with the West and with the Russians, over NATO expansion, over values, over many things. What I wanted to say about the neighborhood, I think that Putin is not really afraid that the West will take advantage of these changes in Kyrgyzstan, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. Why? Because all these countries are much better and much closer connected with Russia than Ukraine was 6 years ago. Belarus is economically completely dependent on Russia. Kyrgyzstan as well, because Kyrgyzstan is also a member of the Eurasian Club. And in Azerbaijan and Armenia, both countries also get weapons from Russia and are economically intertwined with Moscow.
Sabine Adler, very briefly, your opening statement said Russia remains on the wrong side of history. What would it take to put it on the right side? And is Vladimir Putin capable of delivering that?
What Alexander just said makes me thinking about the past. The situation compared to what we have now, it feels like the fall of the wall. When I think about this former time, it was a period of happiness, of hope, of joy. And I can't see this in this moment, the other way around, I would say. No, nothing. What we see now is fear, is the world changes, the coronavirus is taking over the lives, the whole life, and no, nothing at all. But to come back to the question, Putin and Russia on the right side of history would mean to stop interference in internal affairs of our other countries, sowing discord in other countries, to do something with positive energy, not just everything with such negative energy what I see now. And that's what I mean.
Thank you very much. Let us take a closer look at where history is taking Belarus. Managed democracy is a term used to describe not only Russia's system, but also those of key neighbors like Belarus. But many people there have had enough.
Mass protests have been held for weeks in Belarus against alleged election fraud in the presidential election. President Lukashenko's security forces have brutally beaten down the protests, and he has thrown opposition politicians and demonstrators in jail. But the opposition is not giving up. Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians continue to take to the streets, calling for a general strike and demanding that Lukashenko step down. Opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya had to leave the country for her own safety.
We are fighting for our rights in Belarus now, for our dignity, and I'm sure that we will succeed sooner or later.
Russian President Putin supports the Belarusian government, but is continuing to hold back as long as Lukashenko's power is not truly endangered. Amid a difficult situation in Belarus, the relations with Russia have a solid foundation. How far will Putin go to maintain stability on Russia's external borders?
Vladimir, what's your thinking in terms of Belarus? Could we see regime and generational change there, or do you think Lukashenko in the end will prevail, perhaps not least thanks to help from Putin?
Well, I would divide between what we hope to see and what we will see. I'm afraid we hope to see a regime change, or many in the West and many in Germany hope for a regime change in Belarus. But I'm afraid we will not have any regime change because the script is like Venezuela a couple of months ago, last year, with Mr. Guaido, what was declared by the West to be the president of Venezuela and disappeared from the public view a little time later, I'm afraid. So,
Alexander Rahr, what, if anything, might prompt Putin to actively intervene? How close are his relations with Lukashenko?
Close relations, but we shouldn't forget that Lukashenko is not a Putin puppet. He's doing his own policy. Whenever Russia is too strong for him, it presses upon him, then he runs over to the West. In my opinion, Lukashenko will not survive the next presidency. He will go, but not today, in a couple of years. But before that, he will change the constitution, and we will see, I think, some other power momentums in this country.
Sabine Adler, if Putin continues to exercise restraint, could that incentivize opposition in other places, Kyrgyzstan, for example, where we're already seeing tensions, or Kazakhstan even? Do you think we could see further unrest in other parts of the neighborhood?
I would say that this depends on the situation of these countries, and of course there is no Putin in the world who can stop people going on streets, as we saw this or see this in Belarus and in other countries. Not everything turns around Putin, and that's very important to know and not to fear just because Putin doesn't like such mass demonstrations, such colored revolutions, that they shouldn't start it. And I wouldn't agree that this is a scenery like Venezuela. I think the time of Lukashenko is over. Yes, he fears Putin, that's right. He is afraid of another annexation in his country in this time, and this is not over. But you can't stop people thinking they want to change as long as the change isn't done. And that's why I'm not so pessimistic about Belarus.
Vladimir, you told us that to the degree that there is negative public opinion in Russia about Putin, it has to do with the perception that he's not doing enough about domestic challenges. So does it matter to Russians how he handles these tensions and conflicts in the area?
Yes and no. Yes, it matters because Putin paying close attention to the approval rating in the Russian government is concerned about this approval rating on one hand. On the other hand, there is no such thing like free and democratic elections in Russia. So if the population is not happy with the government, there is no chance to remove or substitute this government with other kind of government. So even with opposition, or take Navalny, he can do whatever he likes on YouTube, but there is no chance for him to be a part of establishment, or to become a part of political establishment and to change the things in the country. So as a Russian population, you can be angry on your government as much as you want, but you have no chance to change things on a legal way. So.
Let me take us to another place in the neighborhood, namely the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. Alexander Rahr, NATO member Turkey is now intervening in support of Azerbaijan, while Russia, at least in the past, has actually delivered weapons to both sides. So what does Putin really want there?
Very simple. He doesn't want to lose Azerbaijan. He knows that Armenia is basically part of Russia, because it is part of the Eurasian Union, it's part of the military union with Russia, and it's dependent on Russia. But for Putin, it's more beneficial if Turkey has its influence in the Caucasus than to have NATO bases under American supervision in the Caucasus. And therefore, he doesn't want to lose Azerbaijan to NATO.
Sabine Adler's nodding there. Is Turkey actually looking to challenge Russia's hegemony in the region, and do you think it could succeed?
I think yes, it is possible. But I think in my opinion, the more important thing is that Erdogan, the Turkish president, is so useful for Putin, and he can't risk to lose Erdogan. And Erdogan is very important to sow discord and to divide NATO. That's the most important thing. And they both know what they do, and they both won't risk their, I wouldn't say kind of collaboration, but they depend on each other. And yeah, that's why I think there is a certain restraint of Putin, and maybe the reason is that.
Vladimir, the EU has been accused of doing too little to push back against both Turkey and Azerbaijan. Interestingly enough, Russia joined forces with France and the US to call for a ceasefire. Is there perhaps even an opening here in regard to Nagorno-Karabakh and the tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan for closer cooperation between Europe and Russia?
I wish it would be this way. I wish it so much, but I'm not sure how the thing will be developed. I absolutely agree with you. Putin and Erdogan playing the game on NATO. It's true, in my opinion. So I would not prognose any future developments on this topic. How close can Russia go with the European Union on Nagorno-Karabakh?
Thank you very much. Elsewhere, cooperation between Russia and the West looks further away than ever. Following the short-lived pledge by both sides to reset Russian-American relations, an array of developments have driven the two further apart.
Ever since the successful revolution in Ukraine, the nation has been a thorn in the side of Russia's President Putin. In February 2014, he annexed the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Supported by Moscow, separatists in eastern Ukraine also quickly gained ground. In Syria's civil war, Russian troops are fighting alongside those of the dictator Assad. After the conflict, Russia wants to establish a permanent military presence in Syria. This would give Russia direct access to the Mediterranean and enable it to become a major player in the Middle East. Putin also wants to exert influence in the West using KGB methods. For example, Russia allegedly tried to influence the US elections in 2016 using cyber attacks and spreading fake news. American Secret Services suspect there is currently a Russian disinformation campaign designed to help Trump in the current presidential election. It shows the level of political culture or the absence of such. I reiterate, we don't interfere. Will Putin succeed in destabilizing the West?
Alexander Rahr, in many respects, Trump, with his undermining of trust in the United States and its democratic system, with his criticism of multilateralism, of NATO in particular, has really played into Putin's hands. Would you say that is by accident or by design?
Yeah, you will ask me probably who is better for Russia, Biden or Putin. I think both are bad for Russia. I mean, for Putin. not for Russia. With Biden, at least, Putin hopes to continue the talks on rearmament and disarmament. With Trump, he may create a new world order. And this may be a dream in Russia. And he knows that for Trump, the big enemy is China and not Russia. He wants to make deals with Russia, whether Biden clearly said that Russia is the biggest threat for the West.
Let me come back to the question posed at the end of that short report, Sabine, and it was about whether Putin is successfully destabilizing the West. Right now, authorities in both the U.S. and Europe report significant evidence of Russian disinformation campaigns. Putin's neighborhood may be increasingly explosive, as we've talked about, but is he nonetheless succeeding quite well in exporting instability to the United States, for example?
I would say yes, absolutely. He is an expert in this. And we saw a very short period of time, this were the Yeltsin years, when informational war didn't play a role. But Putin revived this, and he uses this as a tool, as a very effective tool, to meddle in internal affairs, to sow discord in not just in neighbor countries like Ukraine, like Germany, despite we aren't a direct neighbor, but and as well in the US. And the overall goal, I think, is to slander democracy itself. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. And it's more important than everything else, in my opinion. And at this point, they meet together, Trump, Erdogan, Putin, and the dictators around the world. And that's a really new challenge and a very serious challenge.
Vladimir, in view of all of that, and in view of the recent attack on Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition politician, should Europe be doing more to sanction Putin's abuses of power and his interference? And if so, what additional measures would work?
Well, we see there are European sanctions on Russia since for 6 years from now for the Ukraine and Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. And the question is not if Europe should do more, but how effective these mechanisms are, how much influence the sanctions have on the behavior of Russia. Is it possible to change the Russian behavior by sanctions? And the answer is not really, because we don't have any substantial change in Russian behavior on the geopolitical stage as a result of this sanction. So we can discussing sanctions in Europe, and Europe can impose sanctions on 2 more Russian firms or 3 more Russian citizens. But the question is how effective the sanctions will be.
Alexander Rahr, some leading German politicians, among them former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, have argued in recent years that it's time for a German-Russian reset. Are those voices growing quieter now after the attack on Navalny?
Yeah, sure. They are non-existent anymore. I think, yes, the problems with Russia are obvious with the European Union, but at the same time, we shouldn't destroy, in my view, what has been built between Germany and Russia for Europe, for European security in the past 30 years. And in a dramatic way, this can disappear. And I think probably, yes, the West wants to punish Russia, then punish Russia. But on the other hand, there are so many aspects where we should cooperate in future. Because we are not in the East-West conflict anymore, but in the North-South conflict. We need a common view on how to fight with the challenges which stands in front of us from the South, for Europe and for Russia.
Sabine Adler, Ukraine, Crimea, Syria, there are enormous financial costs to Putin's expansive moves. Could that prove to be a problem for him in the end?
Obviously not. Russia is rich enough to do this, and of course it would be much smarter to spend the money in their own country, but he doesn't do it. And I want to say that I can't agree that we as Germany and Russia to the same level destroyed the relationship, as Alexander said it. Not Germany destroyed this relationship. I can't. I have to say that.
We're just about out of time, but let me come quickly back to our title, which asked, what is Putin's goal? And Vladimir, if Putin's goal was to restore Russia's position in the world as a global player, what do you think the history books will write? Will they say he succeeded?
It might succeed, yes. Was it short enough?
That was short as can be. So a clear yes to that answer from Vladimir Esipov. And many thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon. Bye-bye.